I did brief AARO in February.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
All things unexplained.
We need to follow through with this subject of what are we going to do with objects, including balloons, if that's what they are, or unknown objects. And so that's what was striking in the last AARO interview that was done recently with Senator Gillibrand is she asked Dr. Kirkpatrick whether or not he had been contacted by DOD, who was studying the balloon question. And he said, well, he gave them their advice, but he was not involved in the decision making. So somehow we got to make that a connection where whatever he finds out is the right people get informed in DOD, and it doesn't look like that's happening right now. From my experience with giving my presentation to AARO, they are having difficulty coordinating with other agencies. They told me that outright on getting validation of these stories they're being, the interviews they're doing. So, yeah, it's a real problem. We have to come to the conclusions soon, whether these objects and which objects are a concern for national security and which are not. So,
Do you think that the government created this program as like a wag the dog sort of situation, that it's just a show? They've got some very intelligent minds working on these things over here while they're actually doing really big things over here, if they're having such trouble connecting with other government agencies?
Well, this goes back to the cabal that I was talking about. The people within intelligence agency, the people that are involved with this cabal, which is this group that's bent on keeping these secrets, are individuals. It's like, for example, CIA. Let's take CIA, for example. I'm sure there are people within CIA that are very knowledgeable about UFOs, and then others that the great majority of other agents in CIA are not. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but it's a very complex, secretive thing we're dealing with. If on the public side, we're going to have a tough time breaking into that cabal group and getting real information. I've done quite a bit of research. We got like I said, a lot of witnesses supporting these events that I've described. So like I said, it's a very well supported case. I did brief AARO in February.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, because your incident was brought up by, I believe, a congressman of some sort at an initial one, and he was a little bit feisty to get yours researched. He was like, "What about this incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base?" And they said, "Oh, we don't, we have no knowledge of that."
One of our favorite quotes is from AARO.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Yes, there was a lot of that.
We were lucky enough a couple weeks ago to talk to Travis Walton, who you might remember was the subject of
I know Travis.
Fire and Set Right, and he was a tremendous guy. We loved having him on the show. But with all this current modern attention around UFOs, NASA, AARO, government hearings, television shows, etc. Well, at least in the public realm, they never acknowledge any sort of thing to do with abduction. What What is your? It's almost like they're whitewashing it
No,
for
they're
our
not.
ability to process it. What's your take on that?
They're not going to acknowledge it. I don't think they don't want to discuss the high strangeness, I guess, aspects of this phenomenon. But uh, the abduction phenomenon is very real. There's no question about it. Uh, and other things like crop circles. Uh, but I think our government wants to focus strictly on whether these are a hazard to air safety or national security, and that's going to be their focus. And you'll probably and that's all they're going to talk about. So it's going to be really up to the rest of us to bring these stories forward, information forward, and make the general population of the world really understand the reality of some of these other aspects of this phenomenon. But I seriously doubt that our government is ever going to talk about it, even though I'm sure they know about it. You know, they've been studying this for at least 70 years after Roswell, and but there's some things that they just won't talk about.
Man, I have so many questions. I don't even know where to go with them. And I want to also be very respectful of your time. We're so grateful to have you with us. Yeah, none of us know why they're hiding these things, and they obviously know that these things are happening. But one thing that you mentioned was getting the general public to talk about them, to come forward with their stories. How do we convince people to do that? Because I know, like I mentioned before we started this show, when I got involved, people would ask me, "Are you really doing a show about UFOs?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. Why?" And then they would say, "Oh, I've seen a UFO." And they would have never told anybody in their lives until this
Yeah,
moment because they felt it was a safe place for them. And I know that, if I had an experience, am I going to tell anybody? I've got young kids who I want to have friends, and what are their parents going to think of me? This is a big hurdle.
yeah, it is a hurdle. There's still a stigma attached to talking about little green men or gray men, whatever color you want, and abductions. And uh, however, it does take courage. You have to overcome your feeling or your fears of telling your stories in order to get the word out there. There are, for example, there's a group called AARO, which talks about, which brings abductees together. There are other groups that people can find where they can talk in private about these things, and then slowly they may come forward publicly. We now have law under the new regulations of the National Defense Authorization Act. The most recent edition of that allows people with non-disclosure agreements like myself to come forward freely and not risk being prosecuted.
Retribution, yes.
Retribution. And so that kind of wording is now getting its way into federal regulations. So things are changing. Things are changing, which will help bring more people forward. But we do have to have more people come forward courageously, especially those that have supporting evidence, either documentary or other witness support.
Looking into the future of ufology, what's your hopes or expectations for the study of UFOs, and what's going to be revealed to us through the military or the government? Are there any specific milestones or breakthroughs that you anticipate or hope to see?
We've already made some great breakthroughs. I was getting very frustrated during those 29 years that nothing would ever really happen. But just the fact that AARO has now interviewed, I think, at least 12 or more witnesses, and those are official records now, historical records, is a big plus, because now the Congress can demand to see those and hopefully release some of those to the public because, for example, my interview was not classified. Neither was that of David Shindeli and other witnesses, showing the connection between UFOs and nukes. So I'm very encouraged that things are changing. Now, whether or not, how long, and whether or not we're going to get information like what our government has been doing as far as what they've learned from recovered craft, which I know that they've recovered and been studying and actually built simulations of those craft and flown them. I know that's happened. And so whether or not the government will release or reveal that to the public is something we're going to have to press for. We're going to have to really push for. So anybody who's listening to this show, just know that this phenomenon is very real. It's very complex, and you can help by educating yourself and then becoming a public advocate for public disclosure.
All things unexplained.